Scotland's traditional skills are in danger. 21st century Scotland still needs stonemasons, thatchers, blacksmiths, stained glass experts and more. But lack of funding and training opportunities, as well as the simple fact many people don't know these career options exist, means skills exist on a knife edge. That's why we're working with the Institute for Conservation and other partners to create a Heritage Skills at Risk register. Here are some of our trainees to explain why their specialist skills are so important for Scotland.
There are just over 300 trained stonemasons in Scotland to look after over 400,000 traditionally constructed buildings.
Blacksmithing in Scotland is at risk because the demand is still there, but it's such a highly skilled profession, and to get there you need to learn from people who have the skills and experience to pass on to you. There are fewer trained blacksmiths than ever. If people aren't able to pass on these skills, who will be able to do these jobs in 50 years?
Thatching is critically endangered in Scotland because of two distinct factors. There are only 6, maybe 7 practicing thatchers in the whole of Scotland, and no single one of them is a full-time thatcher. And the second problem is a dwindling number of thatched properties. We have only maybe 250 to 260 thatched properties in Scotland. It's inherently sustainable by virtue of the fact that the materials are always locally sourced and generally don't involve any power tools. Whilst it isn't necessarily appropriate for a residential building, thatching can be used for a whole myriad of other purposes, such as community buildings or buildings in national parks that might benefit from being camouflaged a bit from the surrounding environment.
There's a declining domestic demand for stained glass. There's a bit of a crisis in funding for historic stained glass, and another factor would be that many of all our glass producers in the UK have closed down. So we have 2 highly qualified stained glass conservators in Scotland and 4 other people who are practicing conservators at the moment.
You look around so many buildings that have been pointed up with cement, and that's not the right material because people don't understand why it doesn't work within the context of a building, and that is why it's so important that we are training people up to be able to look after the buildings in the way that they need to be looked after.
Thatching is one of the first crafts. It's the way that we've been building roofs for thousands of years, and the method is both sustainable and practical.
Stained glass is important in Scotland because it tells us the story of our culture, really, and the different movements and different things that were going on at specific times.
Stonemasonry has been practiced in Scotland for a long time. I'm not entirely sure the exact dates on it, but it's an ancient craft.
People think blacksmithing is about making swords, but it's everywhere. From railings, gates to historic buildings. These skills shaped our towns and cities, and if we lose them, we lose a part of Scotland's identity. Blacksmithing has got a long history in Scotland, going from small village blacksmiths to island smiths to the huge industrial works that have happened in places like Glasgow.
Scotland has a lot of built heritage, which means a craft like stonemasonry is so important because so many of the buildings here are, they're older than entire countries if you think about it. Everything around you when you walk through a town, you'll be able to see a building that is part of Scotland's built heritage, part of its history, because that's just the fabric of how the towns are made.
I feel connected to a distinct lineage of craftspeople who've been practicing this skill for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Retaining the skill of thatching matters because it's intimately linked with a very specific working class and Gallic heritage that doesn't get a lot of attention as opposed to big, grand, stately homes or castles.
It's a variety of things, really. Some new glass, some repairs, and some really quite big projects. I like the combination of it being really quite fine studio work, and then the other part of it is being up scaffolds, hanging on to for dear life to these huge bits of glass, trying to put them back into the apertures that they belong in. At the moment, we're doing some large-scale repair work on windows from Tynecastle School. That job's quite labour-intensive, and it's to do with replacing broken glass, cleaning the glass, and repairing lead, and then putting it back into the wooden tracery and making sure the wooden tracery is secure, and then sending it back to the client.
One of the challenges of being a blacksmith is thinking like a blacksmith and just using your problem solving to think almost anything that you draw can be made. So it's just finding out how to do it. What I love about blacksmithing is just being an active participant in our history of making things in the styles that they have been in the past, but making new things that can exist for who knows how long. I had studied blacksmithing before at college, and I learned an awful lot in my time there, but it doesn't compare to doing it Monday to Friday and being able to do my dream job every day.
It's not very common, especially here in Scotland. Therefore, when people see it, I think they notice it. Reminds people of a previous way of life. And it looks cute. The benefit of thatching is it's inherently visual. You can look at it and it looks quite impressive. Crafts work in itself is inherently rewarding, I think, and it's very peace-inducing, and you start the day with a set of materials and you finish the day with a roof, and that is very fulfilling.
When I walk around the monuments that we work on, I actually spend quite a lot of time thinking about, the people who've worked on the monument previously, the stonemasons that constructed this place, the work that they did, what were their lives like, how long the stones took them to cut. And I think about whether they ever considered that in the future there may be somebody looking at their stone going, that's worn and we need to replace it, we need to conserve this, and how they would feel about it. And putting it in the context of me and the work I do and putting stones into buildings, I think about when's the next time somebody's going to seriously consider this stone? Will someone have to take this out and replace it? And that's part of the history of the building, part of the story. I love my job. I find it really spiritually fulfilling being able to work on historic sites and be around the history and knowing that the work that I do will be here for people to enjoy for the centuries that come after.
Blacksmithing is the forging and forming of hot metal. Blacksmithing in Scotland has gone on for over 1,000 years, and even before that the same processes were used for working with tin and gold and bronze. And it's changed throughout history as technology has. It's thought that there's around 20 architectural blacksmiths still working in Scotland who use traditional forging techniques.
Thatching is the construction of roofs using organic materials such as grasses or plants. Thatching is unique to Scotland by virtue of the sheer variety of materials that we use, in contrast to somewhere like down south where the list of materials is very strict and regimented. Up here it's myriad and varied. Heather is the material that I'm most familiar with, and it is uniquely used for thatching in Scotland. And whilst there isn't a huge variety of different tools used in the process, what it does require is a specific knowledge around the gathering of the material, what makes good thatch heather, and how to harvest it. A good quality heather thatch will last for around 30 years, with remedial work on the ridge done every 5 years or so. People think it's old-fashioned, but it's actually very practical and sustainable.
I suppose there's been some changes in glass in terms of the chemicals that we can use these days to create different colours. The tools that we use are pretty much the same as they were using forever, really. So we have lead knives. This is one here. Up the other end of the table somewhere there's a thing called a fid, which is a piece of, they now make them out of plastic, but originally they were bone, and we use that to manipulate the lead and push glass into areas, and it can do that without damaging the glass.
The tools and techniques that we use in stonemasonry, in the sort of sense of what we do when we're learning at college, is very similar to what historically has been used. We use the same kinds of chisels, the same techniques to get the stone down to where we want it. The only difference is the stuff we use is made of stronger materials that don't wear as easily. These buildings were made to last using natural materials, and repairing and maintaining these buildings is key to a sustainable Scotland.
Historic Environment Scotland is taking action. We're working with partners to create a Heritage Skills at Risk register. What skills do you think are important for Scotland? Let us know in the comments.